Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today is very much an AXOM bulletin, a short bulletin, just to keep the fires burning over the weekend. Plenty to talk about. The biggest possible issues that Celtic are going to face, not being a loss of form or injury, but actually the COVID international issues that have been created over the last few days in respect of positive tests and in isolation for anyone who's come into contact with the players who have tested positive, and it's a concerning trend that we are seeing develop in front of us. I think when you're looking at any positive test, and we've said on here before, obviously our biggest concern is with the players' health and we want them to get back to full fitness. But, you know, one of the examples that's been brought up over the last week or so is in Austria in relation to Salzburg, who pulled out all their international players due to the reason that 3 players had tested positive. And the reason they were able to do that is that there was a COVID-19 prevention concept in place. And that was in conjunction with the Austrian FA, the Bundesliga, and also the authorities. So something was in place. And when you look at Scottish football, why was nothing in place for Scottish football clubs going into the international break? It seems absolutely absurd that the internationals are getting played in the first place. I mean, I've just seen there, obviously, the Republic of Ireland. Their game has just finished goalless against Wales. Shane Duffy, who's going to be a massively important player for Celtic, came through that game unscathed, thankfully. But, you know, they've already had 7 players. The Republic of Ireland have already had 7 players affected by this. So there was a huge concern and a genuine concern that Shane Duffy would be caught up in that. So you're looking at these situations and, you know, there's a duty of care to the players as much as anything else. It would appear that international football is a COVID hotbed. It really is. It's a breeding ground when you consider the amount of tests that a club like Celtic have done that have come back negative as soon as these players are mixing and travelling around, and it seems to be spreading like wildfire. So what we need to do, obviously, is we need to just continue to look at the statements that are coming out of Celtic Park. It was interesting to note that Celtic released a statement, and the one point of that, under FIFA regulations, clubs are obliged to release players for international duty. Of course, you know, clubs must acquiesce to international call-ups, but under the circumstances, what could be done? Will a club actually go toe-to-toe with the authorities on this? You know, what would the sanctions be? Probably it would result in the players being punished by the relevant international authorities, and they would miss the game anyway. But it is getting to the ridiculous stage. And obviously the fixtures seem to be going ahead regardless of the duty of care to the actual players who are involved. And it's a huge concern for me. Quite a few people have come in and said we shouldn't be discussing COVID on a Celtic podcast, but I think that's absurd when we're losing players to this illness. And obviously we've got the Glasgow Derby coming up on Saturday. Early kick-off, and we'll be here to cover that game because I think it certainly will go ahead. I mean, what are the regulations in relation to a game going ahead? I think the last time I checked, it was obviously just recently due to an outbreak. If you've got 13 fit players and one of them's a goalkeeper, then you play the game. So I don't think we're as ravaged as that, but there is a possibility. I mean, this has been waiting to happen, isn't it? You know, we're all in bubbles, and I understand football clubs are in bubbles and they're travelling all over to play these fixtures. It seems completely absurd, and I think that when you look at some of the points coming through, it makes absolute sense. RFC 72, obviously not a fan of our football club, but coming on and making a good point. It's all about greed for these international games, worldwide pandemic, and they want players to travel the world. Utter madness. I've got to agree with you. Absolutely do agree with you. I don't think the game's going to be cancelled. You know, it will go ahead. Celtic are going to be without at least 3 first-team players. The 3 players quoted, at least 2 of them would have started the game. Beaton may even have started the game. We had a wee joke about Beaton, and I think he, tongue-in-cheek, said it wasn't answering his phone to Neil Lennon because obviously 1 minute he's injured for Celtic, then he turns up and plays particularly well for Israel against Scotland. But the flip side of that light-hearted nature is the fact that he has contracted this illness. So it's going to affect him, it's going to affect his fitness, his condition, and it's going to affect the club as we try and move forward. And the other players, of course, Edouard, already in isolation, and Ryan Christie, who this week again was linked to a move to Nice. Make into that what you will, read into that what you will, over in France. Possibly a January approach coming in from the club, but he's still got plenty of time left in his contract, and hopefully he will consider the offer that's on the table. After 107 games, 35 goals, he is one of the most influential players in that Celtic side. We're going to miss him on Saturday. We're all obviously going to miss Edouard. He'd have been a starter. And I've had to look at my team. It's my third version of my predicted starting lineup, which I'll share with you on this shortened version of the bulletin. We don't normally come and do bulletins on the weekend day that Celtic are not playing, but over this weekend I think it was necessary. Obviously we'll be looking with interest at the Scotland v Slovakia game tonight, not particularly for the score, to be honest with you, just to make sure that the Celtic players come through them. They come through them without any further instances of COVID being reported. So let's have a wee look through some more of the points coming through. And Michael Quinn, exactly what I was just saying there, Michael. I guess I need to revise my back three for next week now. These internationals should have been postponed, in my opinion. Well, it's becoming more and more clear as the days go on and the cases continue to grow, Michael, that you're absolutely spot on. I'm having to look at the team as well. Having already dropped Edouard and Christie from the starting lineup, and I'm going to have to do the same with Beaton, who was on my bench. So we've got Edmund Byrne coming in. We need to crack on with football. Stopping the internationals will lead to stopping league games as soon as there is a cluster. The 5-sub rule is there to help through COVID. It is, I just feel that, with the increase and the spark in these cases, you've really got to look as well at the well-being, first and foremost of the players, and their well-being has to be paramount to any decisions that are made. I'm just astonished, or should I be, that the relevant authorities, very much like the Austrian authorities, they didn't have something in place. The COVID-19 prevention concept allowed Salzburg to pull out all international players as soon as they hit 3 positive cases. Celtic have hit 3, 2 with the illness, 1 as a result of being in direct contact with someone with the illness. So we're at that stage, and there's nothing there to protect the players, and there's nothing there to protect the club. Tony Hutton, it's hard enough getting domestic games going, never mind internationals, cancel them. This is the thing, Tony, I totally agree with you, but you can just see that they're going to dig their heels in and continue to fly international teams all over the place, playing these games and continuing with the increase. They then obviously then come back, and that then has a potential to spread throughout the domestic game. If there's any kind of delay in a domestic game this season for Scottish football, and I'm sure for other nations, it's going to be absolutely drastic, isn't it? I mean, beyond the awarding of titles, etc., the survival of clubs is already in the balance. And if due to international travel to play some international games, there are multiple outbreaks in the domestic game, then, the death of clubs will be the result of that, which, it's as dramatic as that. These players coming back, playing games this weekend, spreading it through the Scottish game, and before you know it, we really are facing massive issues with the future of the Scottish game. follower Celtic, welcome back. You are regularly getting involved. It's great to hear from you. This is an unusual one for us because it is the day off, but we are broadcasting over this weekend. It's a short bulletin. I won't be here for too much longer, but we'll get through your comments. It's shocking to see the football governing bodies forcing clubs to make players available. Yeah, under normal circumstances, you can understand it. Managers have come up against international bodies time and time again for withdrawn players, etc., with one eye on their own domestic game, and that's understandable. That's always going to happen. But this is different, isn't it? This is a pandemic, and it's ridiculous to think that we're even having this discussion. And the fact that we've got players out there playing 3 games, which is bad enough, as Caplo Mark points out. Internationals should have been suspended. Bizarre, 3 games in 1 week. Absolutely. And then, you're going toe to toe with your biggest challengers this season on Saturday. Graham, Paul, after Edouard's positive test, Celtic should have pulled all our players on international duty. I almost led, actually, Graham, with that as the question. Should Celtic do such a thing? But you're probably putting yourself up for ridicule if you suggest that, because there will be sanctions in place, and yet you go further back and you ask yourself what could have been done in advance, and that would need to have been done, I think, in conjunction with the authorities. And obviously we know, or we may have a view on how competent we think the authorities are within the Scottish game, and then beyond the Scottish game, obviously with the governing authorities. And I know that Celtic are in discussions with the governing bodies as we speak. So you would hope that something could be done, but I fear that nothing at this moment in time can or will be done, because the actual prevention concept that the Austrians had in place was in place. That's the issue. Scottish football has nothing in place unless someone can tell me otherwise, and that is the biggest issue that we have at this moment in time. And we are over there playing games, or at Hampden playing games, and there's nothing we can do to protect your asset and to protect the health of your players. So it is really disappointing when you come up against these issues that Celtic are facing at the moment. Graham, that's a great point you made there, and it would have been great. When will a club do that? Without that policy being in place, as it was with the Austrians, it's very unlikely that any club will do it, because the sanctions could be so grave. I don't even think you're setting a precedent, because we're never going to be in this situation again of a global pandemic. And in our lifetimes, you wouldn't have thought. The penalty spot comments that to play international and European football is madness. It absolutely seems that way, doesn't it, Kevin? And so Graham goes on to say, if it's good enough for Salzburg to do it, then it's good enough for Celtic to do the same. I think the biggest issue would be, Graham, is Salzburg were playing along to a concept or a policy that had already been agreed, and Scottish football doesn't have anything in place. So if Celtic were to pull their players out, you would probably be looking at a situation where we would be heavily sanctioned for it, and that again opens up a massive can of worms in Scottish football when it comes to sanctions and who should and shouldn't be sanctioned. Stephen Coulthard agrees internationals should have been suspended with this COVID-19 situation. It seems absurd that they haven't, it really does. And Joe Porter goes on to comment that having international football in a pandemic is beyond stupidity. It is. And then you just ask yourself, Joe, once you were in this situation, how do you get out of it? There's nothing in place to allow Celtic to withdraw our players, Celtic's own players, without heavy sanctions. And, Andrew Faulds, is McGregor and Elhamed COVID-free because they were playing? Even Jack. This is the thing, the reason that Ryan Christie is isolating is due to the fact, apparently, that he was in close quarters with Stuart Armstrong, and obviously Kieran Tierney fell foul of that as well. If they're in one of the players' rooms playing a computer game, as it might have been, then obviously they're in close contact. But when it comes to sport and contact sport and sweat and all this kind of stuff, it makes you wonder, Andrew, doesn't it? Who else was in close contact with the player who has been tested as positive? But obviously, the players are being tested on a regular basis, and until they come up with a positive themselves, what would be classed as coming into contact? Being on a football park, I would have said so. Rubbing shoulders with someone, tackling someone, breathing over someone, sweating over someone. I would say that's coming into close quarters, Andrew. Absolutely. When I go through these comments, it's refreshing that so many people have comments to make, because it's one of these subjects we would much rather not be talking about and discussing, but it is affecting Celtic's preparations now for this game. Kevin Graham, well, I can make a case for the competitive international games, and that's a big push. The number of international friendlies being played is baffling. And I think absolutely you would be spot on to suggest that, Kevin. This penalty spot positive case is 7 days, and any negative case has to self-isolate for 14. And so I think that we have a general consensus almost among those being involved in discussing this on a Celtic State of Minds bulletin. But it is something that's concerning me for the upcoming game against Rangers. And Pat makes the point that get Duffy back, it's all over the Irish squad. I think they were missing 7 players today, Pat, for their 0-0 draw against Wales. And a Celtic target, I say that in inverted commas, he was certainly one of the 19 or 20 players that were linked to Celtic during the transfer window. James McLeish was sent off today for 2 bookable offences, the second of which seemed a lot worse than it actually was, but it seemed to be a booking nonetheless, and he had to walk early for that one. Celtic Rad junior teams are pulling out of the Western Premier League. I saw that this morning. I did see a couple of I've seen a couple of teams making statements to that effect. It's only a matter of time before more teams fall by the wayside. Some of these teams, as you'll fully expect, can probably just shut up shop because they're not operating day to day as businesses. They can shut up shop and then come back to competitive action if and when it's safe to do so. Other clubs, obviously, with overheads and staff to a certain degree, will really be struggling this season. And I think also that's another thing that we may well see the effects of this international football over the last week or so. These players coming back to their domestic games and spreading the virus like wildfire. The international stage seems to have been a breeding ground, and those players are going to come back to their respective clubs. They're training with the clubs. Yeah, I get that they're getting loads of testing, but it could well be that you look at the Republic Islands, 7 players. Imagine Celtic squad was ravaged by 7 players. We're already at 3 at the moment. So that is something that we really need to be concerned about as well. Now, Facebook, unfortunately, I don't know who the user is, but welcome to the show. Afternoon. My reading of it is this: Eddie and Beaton already had it, as it takes a couple of days to show, apparently. If that's the case, then the week ahead could be a long one. Keep up the good work, Paul. Yeah, that is a massive concern, isn't it? I mean, obviously, if that was the case, and then it might take a while for further positive tests to show at Celtic Park. So very concerned at this moment in time for the big game on Saturday. We do have plans to come out live on Friday night with a bulletin and get you involved, because we generally come on as the bulletin at 12:30. Today it's been a wee bit later because it's a Sunday and it's a day off, and I won't keep you much longer than needs be. But we will come out with a live bulletin on the Friday night, as well as your normal 12:30, and we'll be there for the full duration of the game, half an hour before the game, half an hour after the game. Tam Mannion, welcome back to the show, Tam. It is all about the money, as it always is, isn't it, with football? If the internationals weren't played, it would put the Euros at risk again. I'm not condoning it. I love to abandon them to protect Celtic. My biggest concern, Tam, doing a wee bit of research, was trying to find out what would the sanctions be if Celtic pulled out players from their respective nations, and I'm pretty sure that the international bodies would get involved, and there would be heavy sanctions on any club that would be so bold as to do that. So they might end up missing the game on Saturday. In any case, it could even be worse than that. And Kevin Graham is not looking at the positive side of this by saying this season is not finishing. And, this is a big thing, Kevin. Obviously, we're talking football. We know the graver side of this is, the day-to-day lives of people at risk, and business and employment and all of these things, and industry and economics. We know that everything has been affected. And everything that is put in place positively at Celtic, the amount of tests that are coming back negative, the way that they have conducted it. Ryan Christie, so disappointed when he was put out of the Celtic Rangers game, came out, said he hadn't broken any rules. The club reiterated that. Yet we could be facing that scenario, Kevin, that the season may not finish. And obviously we need to ensure that Celtic are in pole position for any eventuality. Van, you are joining us via YouTube. Anyone who is watching this bulletin on YouTube, then this is the norm. A Celtic State of Mind go out on a daily basis. We normally take one day off at the weekend when Celtic are not playing. And we do multiple bulletins, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 during the day. You can watch them on social media channels, Twitter and Facebook, and also on YouTube. So get subscribing. It's all free of charge. And you're saying it's a week away. There'll be no fans, but I'm buzzing already. Unleash the Griff. Well, it's going to be an unusual atmosphere to be playing Rangers with absolutely no fans. We've been in a situation where we've had no Celtic fans because the club banned Celtic fans famously from attending a game back in the 1990s at Ibrox. And from Facebook, it's the fact that there's a lot of travel involved. Absolute madness to allow non-domestic games to go ahead right now. I know it is madness, isn't it? And it would have only been a temporary measure to ensure that we can continue as normal as possible. But this seems absurd, and everybody is in agreement with that. And Hugh Connolly, welcome back to the show. With the Europa League, we could end up with our 11 first team. Could end up with most of them having to quarantine. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And obviously, coming up very, very soon is the game against AC Milan. Would have normally been a mouth-watering prospect for fans to be at such a game. We're going to have to console ourselves with some live action, and a Celtic State of Mind will be going through every game and we'll be kicking every ball. So Ibrahimovic will be playing in that game, coming back with negative tests. It's famously one of his favourite stadiums to play in. He spoke very highly of Celtic Park, having performed there for Ajax in his younger days. And it would have been brilliant to see the big man in the flesh and live at Celtic Park, wouldn't it? So still going strong, and I'll look forward to watching him on the box, and I'll be discussing it with all you guys as well. Scott Callanan, just hope none of our players pick up an injury in the Slovakia game tonight. We'd like to see Clark rest McGregor for the Czech game on Wednesday. And the international games are coming in thick and fast, aren't they? And, there is always the injury worries when players are out on international duty, but we certainly wouldn't want to lose somebody like Callum McGregor to add to the missing list, along with Edwards and Christie and Beaton as well. Patrick Murphy, you're commenting on YouTube. This is something that's going to keep coming up throughout this season and possibly beyond, unless they get a vaccine. COVID is here to stay. And even when they do, it's here to stay, isn't it? I mean, it's one of the things. COVID will be in our vocabulary for the rest of our lives. We will learn to live with it. There will be aspects of our life that will never be the same again as a result of this. So very, very unfortunate set of circumstances on so many different levels. We're talking about the football level, of course. There are a lot of people out there suffering and much graver consequences than quarantine. So our thoughts go out to all of those people as well. Mamansis, 67, loving that avatar. International football, a step too far during a pandemic. Absolutely. How obvious does that sound? But we're having to say it because it is ongoing. we're having to say this. It seems so obvious when you read it out, but it's so true. It was hard enough getting domestic football back with all the guidelines and procedures in place, yet we're flying people together and all over the place to play international. And for what? It's all about the finances, all about the dollar. Kevin Graham, over the whole game, there will be more and more positive tests this week. Well, there will be on the international level, and then all those players go back to their respective clubs and their training grounds, and that's when we're going to see the real impact. It's a tip of the iceberg what we're actually seeing during the international break. It's after that we're going to see the true impact of the terrible decision to allow these international games to go ahead. Davey trying to write lines for only an excuse, because that one is right up there where only excuse is these days, to be honest with you, Davey boy. And Tony Hudson, if Christie is Lola, whole Scotland team should be in isolation. Well, the thing is, if you're in isolation, Tony, the Scotland team have all been in contact at some point with Stuart Armstrong, haven't they? And I know that there's been masks, and etc., etc. So for me, it's a difficult one with Christie. It's so disappointing that he's going to be missing the game under the circumstances. It's like, tying herself up in red tape when the boy is negative. Yes, I know the risk would be that it's under the surface and they could continue to pass it on, and I totally understand that as well. And Ryan Bias, these internationals are bonkers. Totally agree with you, Ryan. Who would have thought players travelling to different countries would get positive results? Exactly. And we had heard it, hadn't we? We had heard of the spikes after travelling fans, for example. And I know it's much bigger numbers, and I get that, but it's so obvious, isn't it? Travelling fans going to Liverpool and going to Ibrox, and there's the spike. We're going to see something very similar, I'm pretty sure. Tam Mannion, Paul, what's your opinion on Alex McRae being awarded an OBE for services to Scottish football? Well said. If ever there was a case for this system to be abandoned, this is it. Yeah, it's an absolute scandalous system, isn't it, Tam? How anybody would want to be honoured by the British Empire systems, certainly in my scope and in my bubble, as it were, everybody would agree with that. But there are certain people who would only too quickly accept these awards. Alan McRae was on a Celtic State of Mind. I don't know if you were listening back then, Tam, but I did interview him back in the day. Remember when he said that Celtic winning trebles is boring for Scottish football? Remember that one? So we spoke to him about those comments, and he looked delighted when Scott Brown lifted the trophy, didn't he, after the invincible treble? Well, we're still doing it, Alex. We're still winning trebles, and we have absolutely no intention of stopping that because you find it boring. The whole system's, I just need to go back to Professor Phil Scraton, who had been included in I think it was the New Year's Honours list, and he refused the MBE. Professor Phil Scraton, because he didn't want to be part of a British Empire, and the reasons for that would be because, when you're looking at also a discussion I had with John Barnes, who is an MBE, you've got a lot of people who on one hand will accept that award. Why would you accept it? Is it for the betterment of your own career? Does it open up avenues in business, and is there a commercial aspect of it with those three letters after your name? I just think it's such an outdated system, isn't it, Tam? As is the House of Lords, and that's a different podcast, but I'd be happy to run with that and get a few bodies on here to talk about it as well. Yeah, but absolutely, Tam, I think it should be completely abolished. The honours list and everything that it stands for is against all my instincts. A few more comments before we wrap it up. It's a nice short bulletin for you today, half an hour. With COVID contact, there is a 15-minute rule, RE contact. So any players on the pitch wouldn't be in consistent contact with the same player over a 15-minute period. Yeah, I get that again. That might be the policy, but as we know, there could well be the passing on of that virus. So I'm sure the next few weeks will bring in far more cases that Celtic need to deal with. Celtic seem to be the team that's having to deal with it. But let's have a look at the moment. And I get the impression I'm going to have to read this out every single day. My starting lineup for the Rangers game. Barkas in goals. I'm playing with 3 centre-halves. Julien, right back into the team. Duffy and Ayer. Julien obviously could have made way for Ilhamid. And that is something that I did think long and hard about. But I'm going to go for Julien because he is a £7 million man and he's big in games against Rangers. So I'm looking forward to seeing him, Duffy and Ayer. Down the right, I'm going for Frimpong with Laxalt getting his first start. And against Rangers down the left to nullify their 2 fullbacks, who I think are 2 of their more useful players. In the engine room, Brown and McGregor with Encham in front of them. And up front, I'm going to start Lee Griffiths with El Yunusi playing just off him. That means that my subs are now Bain, Ayeti, Klamala, Eduard, Rogic, Soro in for Beaton, Ilhamid, Turnbull and Taylor. That's my team. We'll be talking a wee bit more about starting lineups tomorrow once we know who is and isn't available. It's been a short bulletin, but worthwhile to get your engagement. So I must thank each and every one of you for joining me on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, and I'll see you again tomorrow at our normal time of 12:30.